Today, we're going to jump back to 1977. We're going to explore a document that, honestly, completely changed the way we talk about race, gender, and power. It's called the Combahee River Collective Statement, and it introduced ideas that are still right at the heart of some of our biggest debates today. So, yeah, let's get into it.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at why a separate black feminist politics was even necessary. Then we'll meet the women who actually created it. After that, we'll dig into their huge idea of interlocking oppression. And then, this is a big one, we'll unpack the original meaning of identity politics, which is, often misunderstood. And finally, we'll see why these ideas from over 40 years ago feel more relevant now than ever.
All right, to really get what the Combahee River Collective was about, you have to picture the scene. We're talking about the late 60s, early 70s. This was a time of massive social change. You had the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, all these huge forces challenging the way things were.
But for black women, there was a catch. You had the mainstream women's movement, but it was mostly led by and focused on the experiences of white women, and it often just didn't get the racism piece. At the same time, you had the black liberation movement, which was powerful, but also often very male-dominated and could be pretty sexist. So black women were left feeling kinda politically homeless. Like, where did they fit in?
This quote from Barbara Smith, who is one of the statement's authors, really captures that initial skepticism. For a lot of black women, this idea of a universal sisterhood just didn't ring true. Their experience of being a woman was completely tangled up with their experience of racism. And the mainstream feminist movement just wasn't talking about that.
But at the same time, sexism was a very real, separate thing in their lives. Barbara Smith tells these stories about trying to buy a typewriter on credit and being denied just because she was a woman, or going for a job interview with Pan Am and being flat out told that women couldn't advance into management. And even inside black radical groups, she saw men who expected women to just, fall in line and be quiet. This wasn't abstract stuff. This was their daily life.
So it all comes down to this. Black women realized they had to build their own political home. They needed a framework that was fiercely anti-racist in a way the women's movement wasn't, and also fiercely anti-sexist in a way the black liberation movement often wasn't. They had to fight on all fronts at once. And it was out of that exact need, that urgency, that a new group came together to try and build that very thing. They were called the Combahee River Collective, or the CRC for short. They formed in Boston back in '74, and they were a group of black feminists, many of whom were also lesbians, who'd actually broken off from another group because they wanted to carve out a more radical, socialist-influenced path.
And the story behind their name, it tells you everything. They specifically decided, let's not name this group after one person. Instead, they chose to honor a collective action. They named it after Harriet Tubman's 1853 raid on the Combahee River in South Carolina. It's the only military campaign in American history that was planned and led by a woman, and it freed over 750 enslaved people. The name itself was a mission statement.
And you have to understand, these women were not new to this, not at all. They were seasoned organizers, veterans of the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party, the anti-war movement, socialist groups, you name it. They brought all this incredible, hands-on experience from all these different radical traditions to the table to build something entirely new. And all that rich experience led them to what is probably their most important contribution, an idea that really changed political thinking forever. They called it interlocking oppression. The idea is pretty straightforward when you think about it. It's that you can't understand a black woman's life by looking at racism over here and sexism over there and classism somewhere else as if they're all separate boxes. They argued that these systems are all woven together. They're experienced all at the same time, creating something totally unique. This is really the idea that came before the term a lot of us know today as intersectionality.
Okay, let's use a really practical example to make this crystal clear. I'm sure you've heard this statistic before. On average, in the US, women make about 80 cents for every dollar a man makes, right? That's a pretty clear measurement of sexism's economic impact.
But, and this is the whole point, that number does not tell the full story. If you look specifically at African American women, they make on average just 64 cents for every dollar a white man makes. That's a much bigger gap. So why?
This visual just lays it out perfectly. That 20-cent gap between white men and white women, that shows you the cost of sexism. But that extra 16-cent drop for black women, that shows you how racism and sexism interlock. They stack on top of each other. They compound the problem. You can't pull them apart because in real life, they're experienced at the exact same time. Okay, so this powerful analysis of their own lives
led the CRC to come up with one of the most famous, and yeah, probably one of the most misunderstood, political terms of the last 50 years.
So what on earth did identity politics actually mean to the women who came up with the term? It's a really important question because how they defined it is worlds away from how the term is often thrown around today.
Here it is, right from the source. For them, identity politics was simple. It meant that your own lived experience of oppression, as a black woman for instance, was a legitimate, powerful place to start your political work. It was a way of saying, we have a right to focus on our own freedom, to define our own struggles, not to be helpers in somebody else's movement.
So let's just be super clear here. For the CRC, identity politics was a tool for building coalitions. It was a way to understand your own reality so that you could find common ground with other people who were also fighting against oppression. It was never meant to be about exclusion or creating some kind of oppression Olympics. It was the starting point for solidarity, not an excuse to shut other people out.
And that brings us right back to today. Because even though this was all written down in 1977, the ideas from the Combahee River Collective feel like they could have been written yesterday.
Their legacy is just huge. You can draw a direct line from their framework of interlocking oppression to the Black Lives Matter movement, which intentionally centers the experiences of black women and queer and trans people. It's the foundation for the modern fight for reproductive justice, which gets at issues like forced sterilization have always hit women of color the hardest. And it absolutely informs the activism for the rights of trans women of color, who face that brutal combination of transphobia, racism, and sexism.
This quote might just be the most powerful summary of their entire vision. It's not about putting one group first. It's this profound insight that because black women live at the intersection of so many different systems of oppression, to achieve their freedom, you would have to tear down all of those systems. And if you do that, well, then everybody gets free. It is the ultimate case for solidarity.
So we'll just leave you with this to think about. Now that you know where these ideas and these terms actually came from this small, dedicated group of radical black women organizing for their own survival, how does that change the way you hear those words used in the political arguments we're all having today? Thanks for tuning in.